Good morning. You're watching Morning at 10 TV on this wonderful Friday. Some of you probably very glad you've gotten to the end of the week. Others don't even know how it flew by. Well, this morning on Take Note, I think 2018 can be deemed the year where we've discussed things like violence against women and girls so much that people are wondering whether this is the first time we've discussed it or this is the most vocal we have become. But well, that just goes to show you there's some change happening, there's something yielding from the discussions we're having against this discussion. Joining me this morning to even say more about that and what 16 days of activism will actually look like is from UN Women, the eVal specialist. It is Ending Violence Against Women, Susan Oregede. Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Every time there's a woman to woman speaking about this discussion, you just feel like there's fire about to happen. Yeah. So you are a specialist in, it's a program you said to me.
Yeah.
Ending Violence Against Women. You said, and girls.
Yeah, and girls.
Now, when people hear about gender-based violence, I was just telling you, people just assume it's a husband beating a wife. That's all they classify as gender-based violence.
Gender-based violence actually is more than beating. Mm-hmm. It includes any act that can cause or is likely to cause harm or suffering to a person because of their gender. Okay. And there are a number of types. For instance, there is emotional violence, there is physical violence, which is the beating you're talking about. There is economic violence where somebody or a man would deny the wife to participate in gainful employment or in business. There is psychological violence, which includes uttering words to a woman or a person which are demeaning,
make them feel less of a human being.
Yes, so it's a range of types of violence.
It was interesting. About 3 months ago, there was a conversation I joined of very ambitious, educated women, and they were saying that submission in some cultures is actually violence against women. I said, really? They said, well, some get to extremes where you think you're submitting, but actually, you know, you're being, I'm not sure how they describe, but they're saying that how somebody talks to you and the way they treat you in a home can make you feel less of a human being.
That's very true.
And so you won't be productive.
True. It can be dehumanizing. Yes. It can cause emotional trauma in that person that you're talking to in a bad way, or that you decide not to just talk to because you think they are less of a human being. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So that's what gender-based violence really is.
Yeah.
And I know you said women and girls, which means it just doesn't affect women. It also starts with the girls.
Oh, it affects. Gender-based violence affects actually everybody, but then you'll find that when you look at existing statistics, more of the statistics is referring to the women. So more women and girls are affected by gender-based violence or experience gender-based violence than the men. So
yeah, tell me about that thing where they say that even a man with violating a woman's rights or something, and the child is watching, ideally that child is also affected.
It's always very likely that a child who has grown in an abusive environment or watched their parents fighting or beating each other or arguing, that child is likely to become violent in future. If it's a boy, that boy is likely to be a violent husband when they grow up. Yeah. So there is a very strong relationship.
She did say it's to everyone. So gender-based violence isn't just to women. I know you might be looking at the screen thinking, but what about the men? It exists. This morning's discussion, though, is about women. So the 2018 national and international theme for the 16 days of activism is actually violence in the world of work. Before we get into that particular theme, the 16 days of activism, tell us about that.
So the 16 days of activism is that time of the year. So it happens every year, but it's that time of the year when there is heightened advocacy and a call to action by civil society, the community, government, and the media towards ending violence against women.
Not just in
girls.
Uganda.
It's a global campaign. I think it's present in over 164 countries. So the theme for this year is on End Gender-Based Violence in the World of Work.
What do you mean in the world of work? Here at NTV for me?
Yes.
UN Women for you?
You never know. So violence against women occurs in the public spheres and also in the private places.
Yes.
So in this case, we are focusing on in the world of work. So especially like sexual harassment occurs in the world of work.
Yeah.
Sexual harassment is the unwelcome sexual advances towards a person. It can be verbal, it can be non-verbal, but as long as it is unwelcome, it is violence. Violence in the public spaces also occurs in Uganda, but a lot of people don't know that it's actually violence. When you go to the taxi park or you pass by the roads, you find people whistling, you find in the taxi,
comments,
or there's people just touching your boobs or your butt. That is sexual harassment that now we are talking about.
That has become normal.
Yeah, it's normal in people's minds, but it's actually a violation of those people's rights, and it's punishable by law.
Imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the violence in the world of work. That's the theme, not just in Uganda, world over.
Yes.
And they're looking to pick out those that can be termed as violence in the work, sexual violence in the workplace.
So violence in the workplace can be sexual, can be emotional, can be physical.
Right.
It's all forms of violence as long as it's occurring in the workplace.
Okay. So the theme is for all forms of violence.
All forms of violence
in the workplace.
In the workplace.
Yeah. So when I was reading through the concept, I also saw #HearMeToo movement.
Yes.
And I was like, Me Too. I've seen Me Too. So is this different? What is the #HearMeToo movement?
So the Hear Me. So in addition to the local campaign or the 16 Days of Activism campaign. There is the United Nations Secretary General's campaign to end violence against women and girls. And that campaign, which is also a global campaign within the UN, complements local efforts. So for that global level campaign, the theme is Hear Me Too. Now, why Hear Me Too? Because for so long, a lot of women and girls who experience sexual harassment, even men, in the workplace or wherever in the private spaces, have remained silent. So this campaign is a movement that is providing survivors of gender-based violence, the victims, an opportunity to be heard. So it's calling upon people to speak out,
share their stories,
speak
out,
to get out, because that is the main barrier to ending violence against women, that people don't want to talk about it. Yeah.
I know I've seen that where people say, I have witnessed, I've spoken out, but then the victim wasn't willing to put their voice on the story.
Yes.
And you know there are many reasons why somebody wouldn't want to speak out.
A lot of reasons. One of them is because of their own safety. A lot of people fear that when they talk about the violence in the public, there is going to be retaliation from the perpetrator. So there is that fear of the retaliation, because you know the violence occurs because of the power imbalance between the perpetrator and the survivor or the victim. So then the other reason why women often don't speak out is that they are going to be blamed. Nobody believes them. And then the stigma around the violence itself, and so the shame of coming and speaking out. I know that a lot of women, especially the so-called professional women, are experiencing violence behind those gates, but they don't speak out. And then the last thing about the fear of speaking out is fear to lose a job. I was about to say job security is big. Job security. Because as you said, it's a power imbalance. So sometimes it's somebody in a higher position than you, and you're afraid if I speak out, they're going to do all the, sometimes a supervisor, who's going to make your life hard. But still, the stories need to be told. Exactly. Now, when I wanted to discuss especially sexual harassment in the workplace, and you said people don't report, a lot of people don't. But you know when you said also fear of consequences from the person, you know, who has the perpetrator. There are also people who support the perpetrator who might come against you, who might feel they've sided with the other person because they feel the person is right. And especially I've seen it in the digital world, social media. People will side with the perpetrator and come against the person or the victim. But sexual harassment in the workplace, especially maybe, by that it doesn't only happen to women, happens to men as well. Let's just classify some of the examples, because people are always saying it's a contentious issue. How do we know what is deemed as sexual harassment in the workplace? Apart from the obvious, someone has touched you where they shouldn't be touching you. So it can be online, especially in this era of technology.
Yes.
So when you receive some sexual messages on your phone, I think the most recent example that went public was that of the woman MP
Yes.
of Kabarole, who this young 23-year-old was sending sexual messages and I think images on their phone. It can be non-verbal indications to this person. Maybe you're in a meeting and then the person signals to you that it's a sexual, like does something sexual. It can be in the church. I understand that even in the church, this shocked me that during that time of going for the Holy Communion,
Yes.
that there is always a line that sometimes men stand behind these women with big butts with an intention for their own sexual satisfaction. And then things like you might greet somebody and then he tickles. That is sexual harassment. So it occurs in different ways, but people are unaware that it is an abuse.
Jeez, you people want us to separate lines and Holy Communion now. Women on one side, men on one side. What's wrong with us?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, with each year comes something different.
Yeah.
But I mean, the biggest story when you said in a meeting, I always give the example that the CEO, former CEO of Pepsi, imagine global. She said she is a woman, right? And so when she walks into a boardroom, these are men looking at her.
Yeah.
And she already knows there's an imbalance there. There's already a problem. But she says most of the men don't respect her. So they reply to her, their boss, as, sweetie, I was saying, honey, I was saying, said, what? You would not do that to a fellow man.
Yeah.
So it's because they feel, so even that,
that
sometimes
is
harassment.
Because being a woman, I should be treated the same way other colleagues
if
are
I'm in the same
treated
position,
in the
I'm a
office.
manager, not a female
Exactly.
manager.
Yeah.
But wow, that church one has hit me a bit far.
Yeah.
So you were very keen on talking about laws and policies, what exists and how it can help us as women.
So the thing about the laws in Uganda is that we have very nice, very strong laws.
Really?
For instance, like around GBV for sure, we have quite a number of laws. You have the Domestic Violence Act. You have the we have the sexual harassment regulations in place. We have laws around trafficking. We even have a national GBV policy. However, the challenge is that implementation of these laws has been weak.
Who's in that chain of implementation? Police?
So when you look at the GBV policy, it has different actors, government actors that are mandated to implement the GBV policy. So you have the police that is responsible for conducting investigations and
it's
arrests.
who you report to.
Yes. You have the prosecutors, you have the judiciary, you have the health workers who collect the evidence and provide treatment to the survivors. You have the legal aid actors who provide information and legal counseling to the survivors.
Even support, if you're, for example, at the judiciary level and you're in court, you need support lawyers and all sorts of things.
And then you have also civil society that is doing the awareness, the mobilization, the psychosocial support. So, and then Ministry of Gender, of course, being responsible for overseeing the implementation of this policy. So quite a number of actors are involved,
I think if we're to ask a question on what maybe government can actually do, I think, for example, one of the actors you mentioned in there, police, is where most women should ideally go to report, or men. And someone is listening to your story, there's no empathy, and there's no... help me understand it. Do we have specific officers who are in line with that particular work, or is any...
So, for instance, in the police, there is a child and family protection department that is dedicated to this work of listening or responding to the cases of violence. Then you also have the criminal investigations department. So these two are key. However, the challenge is that they are the least funded, and then they are the least staffed. So that makes it very difficult for them to provide adequate services. And also there's a problem of their mindsets, because we all grow up in the same communities where violence is tolerated. So if these people are not trained, then they will still have the same attitude towards the survivor of blaming, of not believing the survivor. True. And that discourages women from reporting. And then when you look at the judiciary itself, there are delays in the system, delays in ensuring that access to justice. So that alone also it bars women from reporting or pursuing their cases. Currently, there are sessions that the judiciary is having some sessions to reduce on the case backlog. Yes. However, for us, we think this is not going to be the solution to reducing case backlog, because while there is now attention towards reducing case backlog in some districts, in other districts where there is less attention, the numbers are still increasing. Yes. So we
that's where even the perpetrators are most, because there's no legal action.
Yeah, so we appreciate the effort, but we would like to see special courts institutionalized in order to have a sustainable approach towards ensuring access to justice for these cases.
Before we get into what is in the 16 days of activism, I need to ask you, as Susan, as somebody who's a specialist in ending violence against women, what, maybe not an answer 100%, because we can't really end this conversation on violence against women and girls, but what would be our main focus? Is it a mindset change issue? Is it, just like you've been saying, that the key actors need funding and need support to do their job? What is the question? Is it a question of you need to see justice being done that way? You know, what needs to be done? Is it us women as well who need to do better, behave better, do something better? What exactly needs to be done?
Okay, I think to say that women need to behave better,
you've had that conversation. Blame them. You've had
it's that a blame. It's Susan. A blame.
And someone says the woman was dressed a certain way in the workplace. She talks a certain way, and they feel that's the reason.
That is blaming. That is no reason. There is no justification for whatsoever for violence. So for me, I think it's everything has to be done. Everybody has to play their part. The government, we appreciate the political commitment that government has. However, they should put in adequate funding to ensure that the laws are implemented. Recently, I heard the Deputy Chief Justice saying that we should be empowered to do our job. That indicates a lot. It's possible that they are under-resourced. So government should invest in resources in ending violence against women, in implementing the laws. Then we need to ensure that there is wide sensitization of the public, especially reflections around the mindsets to address the negative, the social tolerance to violence. There is also need for reforming the laws, strengthening the laws where they are weak. For instance, the sexual harassment regulations need to be strengthened so that they address sexual harassment in its totality in the workplace, because currently it addresses sexual harassment between an employer and employee, but it doesn't address sexual harassment across the colleagues. So that needs to be strengthened. So there is a lot
has changed, so that should also reflect in our policies.
And the women too have to speak out, the survivors, and that is why there is this Hear Me Too movement. It's here to encourage people to speak out. I
was about to say, here somebody tells their story, and then actually sometimes women, by the way, when we tell our stories, it empowers us too.
Yes.
Because the story no longer has a hold on you.
Exactly. It empowers us, and it empowers another woman to speak out. But as long as we remain silent, then we also condone the problem by remaining silent. But when we speak out and challenge it, then, and our voices are heard, then we draw attention to the community, to the government, that this is a problem.
So that's very key. So I think we'll find that hashtag, Hear Me Too, somewhere. So 16 days of activism, let's get into that. The 16 days start when?
So 16 days of activism starts on 25th, which marks the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, 25th November. up to 10th December, which is
Okay.
the International Human Rights Day.
Great.
Yeah.
So what will be happening in those between the 60 days?
So a number of activities.
Mhm.
UN Women is partnering with the Ministry of Gender, with other UN agencies and communities
Mhm.
to implement a number of activities, which include, for instance, we have today there is the Y Plus Beauty Pageant.
Mhm.
It's looking at addressing stigma against HIV
and AIDS,
and
yeah.
also the link to violence against women, and everybody is welcome.
Mm.
We have a high-level judges forum
Mhm.
where we are targeting prosecutors, magistrates, judges to be in one room and
Mhm.
talk about justice for
They're
women.
key. You were talking about them
Yes.
just now. Yes.
And in that forum, we will be launching our report
Mm.
on plea bargaining. We conducted an assessment of the plea bargaining mechanism and want to share with the judges
Okay.
some of our concerns
Great.
about the use of plea bargaining. We also have a public dialogue in Makerere University.
Mhm.
Recently, there was an investigation on sexual harassment in the university. You've heard about
It's
all
a
these
big
cases
discussion. Yeah.
of the Don, university Don that
Mm.
was expelled. You've heard about cases of sexual harassment by the head teacher of Kibuli.
Mm.
So we are beginning to penetrate the institutions of learning.
Mhm.
So there will be that dialogue.
Great.
It's open to everyone. It's going to be at the Freedom Square.
Mhm.
There's going to be a public dialogue with the parliamentarians themselves. You recently heard about this MP who was saying it's okay for a man to beat his
To
wife.
beat his wife.
So all these things are happening. There is a whole list of activities.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So look out for that hashtag Hear Me Too, because the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence will start this Sunday until the 10th of December.
Yeah.
And UN Women, I'm sure, are partnering with so many activities. So
Yes.
if you're online, you'll find where they are and be part of any of those activities. Susan, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
It's been an interesting conversation.
Thank you for having
We'll be back
me.
soon sometime.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
That's it for Morning at 10 TV. Have a good weekend.